Oh, finally! About time we get a decent film in this franchise.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
I'm not even supposed to be here today! Oh, fuck you!
Come on, you want me to drive? You're supposed to be suicidal. Remember, anybody to drive? Get in the car.
Fuck me in the ass. Fuck you, you stupid cunt.
Hey everyone, it's Don G. Corleone here, and I'm here with a brand new movie review, and this movie review is going to be for 2011's Paranormal Activity 3, the third entry in the Paranormal Activity series. And of course, the prequel film to the first two entries. Part 2 is still a prequel as well, but this is technically a full-on prequel this time. The plot of the Paranormal Activity 3 is, this one is set in 1988, pretty much about younger Katie and Christy, where his focus is a California cinematographer named Dennis who moves to the house of his girlfriend Julie so he can raise a family with their daughters Katie and Christy. Little Christy has this imaginary friend named Toby while weird things happen in the house. Dennis then decides to place cameras in the house to capture images during the night, and soon he finds that there's this entity in the house. Dennis's friend named Randy Rosen researches all the events and learns that his house might be a coven of witches and the children may be in danger. Well, but it's a prequel film, so you know how it's obviously going to end. They'll win. How is this made? Well, literally, like with Paranormal Activity 2, a year after that movie came out, they decided we're going to make a third one because Paranormal Activity 2 made money as well. So they began filming on June 6, 2011, and they ended on August 5th, 2011. And during production, it was under the name called Sports Camp. This time around, the movie was directed by Henry Joost and Ariel Schulman, the directors of the documentary Catfish. And most of the producing team came back as well. Because this is going to be the new Saw now, because Saw was done. So they needed a new Saw. It was also the director's first horror film as well. But anyway, after Paranormal Activity 3 was officially completed, it would go on to be released to the public on October 21st, 2011. And this one got decently positive reviews from people. It got better reviews than Paranormal Activity 2 did, but I'm surprised the first one has better reviews than this does. Because I thought this was actually a better film than the first. Or the second one. And at the box office, this broke financial records upon release. It had a midnight opening for a horror film of $8 million. And before the It 2017 remake by Andy Muschietti came out, this had the best opening day for a horror film with $26 million domestically. Before It took the record with $50 million in 2017. Anyway, and it made $52 million on its opening weekend. No, it didn't surpass, it didn't claim the highest opening weekend for a horror film because technically Hannibal still held that record with $58 million when it released. So it was second place. But yeah. This was surprisingly the most profitable of the franchise. So as for my reaction, well guess what? After two bad first entries in a franchise, I think this might have to be the first one of this series that was enjoyable. Not good per se. I wouldn't say it's good, but it's the least bad of the franchise. I'd say the most tolerable. Closest to somewhat of a good film. It's not as irritating as the first two entries. I mean, this one has better characters, this one has decently better scares, this has a better setting, and it's a better found footage style. This one is a prequel to the first two movies. Like, technically speaking, we start off in 2005, where, like, Katie and Christy are getting together at their house, they find some old VHS tapes, and one of them, like, taken in 1988, where they were children left behind by their grandmother. So they watch a tape, and they pretty much watch that tape, and that's pretty much the premise of the film. One thing I will point out, though, if this is set in 1988, and this was shot in HD in 1:85:1 or 16:8 ratio, like, that should not make sense, because that ratio didn't exist in the 80s. At all, like... Don't you think, like, this should have been shot in, like, 80s ratio, at 1:33:1 or 4:3, actually make it look like it's from the 80s. This looks like it's literally from 2011 when the movie came out. So, it doesn't even feel like it's set in 1988, and it looks like this came from the 2010s. If you're set in that time, don't you think you should have used that ratio instead? Would have been better, but... The new dad of the movie, Dennis, he works as a wedding videographer, and he has this editing system that has, like, two 4:3 monitors and a VHS tape. Like, although, like, the build-up in this movie, it's well thought through, and it does create some huge interest in the storyline, finally. And the homemade video style movie does it best in this film. And the small, like, little jump scares this time, like, there's still some of the cheap stuff in the other movies, but they feel more well done this time around. They're definitely better. They're, like, not as much, like, there's not as, like, much as the cheap door slams you get in the first two. Like, there's less of that this time around. It feels like this one they're actually trying to be scary. This one they're actually trying to put in efforts. Like, I feel like these two, like, I feel like the directors of this movie, the directors of this one should have been the creators of the franchise to begin with. And then maybe we could have had a decent franchise out of this. Not Orange Shithead, the guy who directed the first one. Why couldn't these guys direct the first film? That would have been better. But it's just, yeah, this is the strongest entry in the franchise, because this one tries to keep you intrigued. This one tries to scare you properly. And being like, and it does kind of line up the other movies in a way. It's a nice touch. There's some nice little added sense of humor this time. And it's refreshing, especially like when the film's not trying to scare you. So this time around, it's not trying to bore you as much. The plot revolving around the early supernatural events that happened to these two girls. We get this knowledge of their experience with the demonic nuisance that was, I guess, supposed to be shown in the first two, but it was done poorly. Even though, like, it frustratingly concludes, because it's a prequel, the way it concludes is as well. Well. And also, like, the other reason why I think this is the most tolerable is that it goes to great lengths to assure you have to, like, wipe the nervousness, and when you have directors Henry Goose and Ariel Schulman, they have this remedy to producing like equally much better scares this time around. It seems like these guys actually did a better job and expanding on the original ideas and do some much more consistent fear content to the film. Like, to start off, we start off March 2005, where Katie's delivering these box of videotapes to her pregnant sister, Christy, and her husband, Daniel. Yeah, the asshole from the second one. Yeah, back for a brief cameo in this. And it has footage of them when they're kids, and their mother, and their soon-to-be dad, or her boyfriend. But then a year later, that gets ransacked, like, because that was the second film, when it got ransacked, and the tapes went missing. But then the rest of the movie, which is in 1988 VHS footage, that makes up the rest of the film. Yeah, the footage that looks like it came from 2010, came from 2011. Despite the fact this is set in the 80s. This should be like grainy footage, because it's from the 80s. It's a VHS tape. Don't you think, like, maybe that would be better? Like, here's the thing, like, even the VHS movies do better VHS quality with their camera work. Like, why not do the camera work like that for this movie? If you're watching a VHS tape from 1988, it should have 80s ratio. It should have the ratio of an 80s tape. So that it actually looks like it's from the 80s. But anyway, now we get to a young Katie and Christy. They're living with their mother and her boyfriend. Her boyfriend's name's Dennis, and he notices that Christy's imaginary friend Toby appeared, and strange things were happening around their house. Like, we just jump right into it right away. Like, don't you think, like, first we should have saw how this mother and her boyfriend first met, then him meeting her two kids. And then, like, build up on that first. How about build up on that first? Then Dennis and Julie, they literally attempt to film a sex tape, but the earthquake was probably like, what the fuck are you guys doing? Stop it. Yeah, probably make sure they didn't do that, so it probably erupts and interrupts them from doing that stupid shit. So they review the footage and they see an invisible figure that's revealed to be falling dust. And Dennis gets invited by his friend named Randy to place cameras throughout the house. And so Dennis and Julie also hire a babysitter named Lisa to watch the kids. But the babysitter's desperate to leave because of all the terrifying incidents. And Christy tells her friend Toby that pretty much after that they are not friends anymore. Like, yeah, like surprisingly, like I think this probably would be the shortest one. Sadly, like this is why I wish this one was longer. Like I wish we saw a bit more stuff. Like this one should have been the longest. If it's a prequel, how about build up on that stuff? Like how about build up how this woman and man met, and how this guy met her two kids, and how this Christy girl met Toby. This imaginary friend Toby came up with this imaginary friend named Toby. Like, don't you think you should be doing that stuff if you're a prequel? Not just jumping into everything right away. Movie. But yeah, it's the usual scarce route. Like, the story here is pretty good. Like, there's more meaning. And scares, like, not like just scares for scare's sake. Like, there's more subtlety here. More simple stuff here. Until, like, the end of the movie. Like, yeah, I do like it set in the 80s. Like, the 80s is a great idea to set a film like this in. Sadly, like, the ratio, even if the ratio makes it look like it's from, like, 2010 or 2011... And there's interesting approaches to the camera work. They make for some inventive and effective scares. The third act really deviates from the traditional endings of these films that builds out the world and the characters. That's definitely very well appreciated. And yeah, like, I did like kind of like the whole like family dynamic with Dennis as the sort of stepfather to Kate and Christy. As much as I did kind of like that, there were some distractions from stuff like distractions still at times, like the fact the movie begins with like no such like show to how they did, just jumps into everything straight away. And it's kind of retcon that the VHS tapes that you're supposed to be watching when you view the movie were stolen from the break-in Paranormal Activity 2. Like, seriously, like, honestly, like, we don't show who's watching this. Like, we should have shown, like, are the cult watching this? Like, the cult you see in the marked ones, were they watching this the whole time? Like, are these the one watching the tapes? And how about show characters watching the tape? You know, like, don't just say, this got stolen, and then just randomly cut to the tape without even knowing who's even watching the tape in the first place if they're stolen. In a way. But pretty much, like, it's a major problem because, like, another thing, though, like, if you're a Paranormal Activity film, I'm surprised you don't open up with the text. With the opening text, like your other ones did. Yeah, and the footage in the 80s, yeah, it doesn't look like 80s footage because it looks way too clean. So it looks like modern day. It looks way too modern day to be considered 80s. Though. That's a big problem, like, if you're supposed to be based on a perspective of us, like, us viewers and the audience, they're watching this old homemade footage, like, this is how this comes about, like, yeah, someone breaks into the house from Paranormal Activity 2, steals a box of old VHS tapes, and then you're suddenly watching them, even though they got stolen. We don't know who the person that stole them is, we don't know how these tapes got stolen, like, that should be important. Like, that should be an important thing, and they don't ever touch up on that in the rest of these movies. Like, like, you know what it's going to be about? Like, you're showing these two girls when they're young girls. Right there. At first, they seem like kind of cute, innocent, likable young girls, and that does make it more disturbing when you witness what happens to them, and you know how it's going to end for both of them. Especially like the younger one, Christy, who thinks everything's all funny games, and even though we know that how it's all going to end. And the acting was actually surprisingly the best of this franchise. This one probably has the best acting too. And like, when it comes to the girls and the younger one, like, they actually, the actresses who played the two girls, they were believable, they were engaging, they were actually pretty likable. And right there. And the movie does kind of write itself from here. I'm like, did itself from here, like, in a way. And then, and the rest of the film, like, it can be outlined quicker by, like, referring to those first two movies. Like, this is, like, the one new indigenous inclusion where each pan takes, like, perhaps 12 seconds long, or long enough that your imagination does most of the work for the filmmakers, and it leads to some tense ways where you know something might be happening. Like, yeah. And while things do need to happen to justify labeling the film a horror movie, the scenes that are scariest are kind of the ones where nothing's really happening. Like, like, there's some parts that are kind of effective. Like, the scene with, like, the Bloody Mary scene in the bathroom, where they turn out the lights, like, that's pretty effective. I'll admit, that actually was kind of an effective scare. That's something that's missing from those first two. These are the kind of jump scares that work. Right there. Where Christy and Dennis's friend are playing Bloody Mary in the bathroom. That actually was kind of an effective moment. Right there. These are the kind of scares you should have been doing in the first place. Right there. Why not just do more of that? Then, or the dragging downstairs scene, I think, happens in here. That was done much better here than the first two entries, where it was just laughable. However, when you do show something that does happen, those still get accompanied by the loud noises. And you're like, ugh, yeah, this is the problem with these bloody movies, is they rely on that same thing all the time. The parts where like nothing happens, but you don't hear a noise, that works. Those are the bits that worked. So yeah. After Chrissy renounces Toby's friendship, Dennison discovers a strange symbol in the girl's closet and sees this same symbol that has a book about demonology, and Chrissy then becomes mysteriously ill, and so Julie and Dennis have to take her to the hospital. Then Katie's left home with Randy, and that's when the Bloody Mary scene happens. And then, of course, they get attacked by the black figure that violently flings furniture across the room, scratches Randy on his torso. And then Julie and Dennis returns home. And then, of course, like, Randy informs that the symbol belongs to this witch's coven that actually brainwashed girls of childbearing age so that they can have sons of their own, force them to give up their sons, and force everything afterwards. Julie dismisses this claim, though. Although that does kind of lead into the ending of the second film, where Hunter got abducted at the end of that movie. And then the activity starts to get worse, where, like, Toby, the demon, the imaginary friend, the overarching antagonist of this whole franchise, pulls this gag on the babysitter, pretending to be the sheet ghost, breathes on her to scare her out of the house. Then it attacks Katie, Dennis's partner in crime, in the bathroom. Right there, like that's the part that really does affect me. That's the part, that's probably one of the few scares in this franchise that actually works. Right there. It's not a lazy door slam. It's less cheap this time, and it actually feels more, it actually has some build up. Right there. Like, now that's a scare. Like, Henry and, like, Hoosh and Schulman, they do better job. Like, they do better job creating jump scares than Orange Shithead does. Right there. And then Toby pretty much wants Chrissy to do something. We don't know what kind of it is, though. We'd never find out what it is. She refuses, though, and so Toby drags Katie around. That's probably for once a stir-dragging scene that actually does work. So she accepts. She tries to convince her mother to go to her grandmother's. So I guess Toby wanted them to go to their grandma's. Like, maybe. To set his plan in motion. She refuses that, though. And then Toby drops everything in the kitchen from the ceiling. Like, pretty much, yeah. Still the typical demons messing up the kitchen like we saw in the second one. Right there, but the acting, like, makes the film, like, a decent watch, though. It actually is what actually made me interested in the film this time. They actually good acting. The actually enjoyable characters this time. even if they were still a little shallow, to care too much about their fates, because they don't get much character development, and it's a prequel film, so you know how it's going to end. Like yeah, if this is a prequel film, like, you know prequels don't end well. They just end with the other films being set in motion. But yeah, the dad here, like, even though we know how the dad will probably die at the end of the film, like, he does die. We all know he's going to die as soon as you start the movie. This dad was actually a decent character. So it was actually nice to see this character, unlike the last two husbands that were just... Those two, like, the ones in the last two, you just want to die because of how unpleasant, how stupid they both are. The first one, you had the idiot Mika, who thought he was all badass and cool by making fun of the demon, taunting it, putting powder all over the place, disrespecting the ghost hunter that tried to warn them about stuff, disrespects his girlfriend Katie, brings a fucking Ouija board into the house. And then when he finally realizes everything and actually finally tries to do shit, it's far too late for him, and his girlfriend's already screwed. So and then you have Daniel, who this much more of an egotistical asshole, who's just basically willing to kill his own in-law to basically save his own ass. Right there. And pretty much disbelieves his daughter when she gets locked out of the house. No, it was the wind. Shut up. Yeah. No, that's none of that in this guy. This guy is actually a likable person this time. Yeah, he still brings cameras around the house, but this guy wasn't annoying. This guy wasn't rude, and this guy actually sounded like he actually cared about his soon-to-be children, and actually did care about his girlfriend. Yeah, Dennis was actually a decent character. That's something that was also missing from the first two. Actually decent characters you could kind of tolerate or root for. Right there. Not ones you want to die because of how unpleasant and stupid they are. Right there, like, and unlike the scary moments in the first two that were mostly laughable, here, like, these scary moments are much better done. They're more subtle, and does a good job building the tension and getting to the point fast here. But sadly, though, that doesn't mean the ending is still generic, because we know how this will end, though. This is a prequel, so I guess this had a reason to end unhappy, but still. It always ends like the last ones, and the next one after it. But I guess makes sense here. Here, basically, the demon is harming Katie until Christy agrees to do what it asks. And that's go to the grandmother's house in California. And Julie agrees after she encounters the frightening activity herself. And then Julie and Dennis get woken up at around 1 a.m. by loud disturbances, and Julie goes to investigate it. She doesn't return, so Dennis looks for her. He finds occult imagery on the walls, and a symbol from the girls' room. And several women, including Lois, are all dressed in black. Right there. So he goes back to the house, and the women are in pursuit, like... So yeah, they go to their grandmother's house, like, pretty much, and then that whole thing happens right there. He's finding out everything. The women are in pursuit of him and finds Julie's dead body above the ground. And then it gets thrown at Dennis, and then Dennis finds Christy, and so he goes to hide with Christy in a closet, and then goes to the kitchen. And then Dennis, from a window, he sees the women circling around this bonfire outside. And of course, like, Katie and Lois are in the same room as Julie's body, like... This was one other jump scare that did feel effective. Because for one, this jump scare I'm about to talk about was not a stupid door slam for a change. It wasn't more invisible fucking air punching people. How this one goes. Dennis approaches Katie, trying to get her to leave. Katie turns around with an angry dark-eyed face, roaring at him with... Like, yeah, when she turns around, like, that actually did kind of startle me a little bit. I'm gonna admit that. Yeah, that actually did kind of work. And then Lois shows up, the grandma shows up, and then snaps Dennis's back and kills him. And then Lois then grabs Christy and Katie, tells them to get ready for something, and then they go upstairs. Then Christy calls for Toby. Growling sounds can be heard upstairs. Then the camera cuts out, and that's it. Yeah, the movie ends. Like, this is like the shortest one of the series, like around 81 minutes. If you don't include credits, I think this is like 81 or 80 minutes long. It's that short. And it should not have been short. This should have been the longest one. Like, somehow PA4 is longer than this. Somehow the worst one, Shit Dimension, is longer than this. Somehow PA2 is longer than this. Surprisingly, this should have been the longest one. This should have been way longer. Because there's stuff you should have shown. But yeah, Paranormal Activity 3, yeah. It's the most tolerable. Like, there's a nice little scare at the end. It was effective. Admit that, like... But I don't like that's how it ends. I know it's a prequel. I still don't like that it just abruptly ends there. They never explain a thing about how this all began, how any of the films connect. Like, maybe it's a good thing, though, because I'm not a fan of 1 or 2, but... after this, though, I really thought the franchise was... when I first visited this franchise, I really thought, they were going to actually get their good foot in. It seemed like they might have finally gotten a hold of how to do this. They finally got it right. And it was going to start to get better. No, it didn't. They went back to shit again. The next year. And that's another review. Sadly. So much for this. So much for this starting to finally get good. But yeah. I still have problems with it. Because, for one... This does not feel like the 80s. This feels more like 2011. If you could live... You might as well call this 2011, and you miss nothing. Because this looks like it literally comes from 2011. The camera looks like it comes from 2011. It doesn't even look like VHS quality at all. Like VHS 85, like the sixth film, the VHS series of last year, that's in the 80s, and that has the racial quality of a tape in the 80s right there, and that did it perfectly. I understood what era it was from. Why couldn't that just be the case here? People are complaining, but because it's the 80s. Well, you didn't have big, wide, flat screens in the 80s. You had more smaller TVs that looked like a box. Right there. And you had antennas on them. So you kind of should have been 80s quality here. Even if it would have gotten complaints, if you're going to look like an 80s tape, you need to look like a VHS tape. Right there. And of course, there's still the same cheap jump scares, and the movie's way too short. And even though it's a prequel, it just doesn't really feel like it has a connection to the other ones at all. So for those who actually are fans of the first two, that would be a problem. The connections it has are just the two girls being kids. And of course, the opening bits from the 2005 bits. That's what it has. This, you could just call it, you could just pretend this is its own thing. And I kind of like to prefer that because I don't really like the other movies. And this is the only one I can decently watch. So I could just call this its own thing. There's surprisingly more effective scares. But there's a lot that still also come off as cheap. That's it for bad qualities. So yeah, Paranormal Activity 3, it's the most tolerable of the movies. It's not a worth buying though. It's just the least bad of them all. In the end, Paranormal Activity 3 is more of a stream online if you want to watch a passable film in this chore of a series that I have to get through. I gotta review the next 3 movies. So yeah, I would honestly just stream Paranormal Activity 3. Anyways, guys, that's it for my review of Paranormal Activity 3. And if we're going to rate Paranormal Activity 3, here's how I'm going to rate this movie. So overall, I guess you are clamoring for a passable film in these movies. I would just go stream this one online because this does feel slightly more fresh and better done than the other ones, but that's not saying much. And if you're wondering how I'm going to rate Paranormal Activity 3, I'm going to give Paranormal Activity 3 a 6 out of 10. There we go, guys. That officially wraps up my review for Paranormal Activity 3. Now I want to know in the comments down below what you guys thought of Paranormal Activity 3. And until then, that'll be it for this review. Thank you all for watching. And if you like this and want to see more, don't forget to subscribe to Don G. Corleone.